you have the power with your words to build a mother up or to tear her down completely. And I think that's kind of the message I want to make sure your listeners hear, is that we each have the power to, in our words and in our actions, build up new moms or tear them down.
Hello and welcome to Healing Trauma Mamas. I'm your host, Madon Wingo. Thank you for joining us as we share in our stories and experiences of healing from childhood traumas and birth traumas. Listen as we discuss our struggles, our failures, our strengths and our victories, and all those lessons we've learned along the way. Hello, Healing Trauma Mamas listeners. Well, my special guest today is Haley. Haley, do you mind introducing yourself?
Absolutely. I'm Haley Frazier and I live in Abilene. I am a mom to 4 boys, ages 8, 5, almost 4, and almost 2. I have a husband, and my background professionally is in school psychology, and I've been doing that for about 12 years. And I also just opened my own independent psychology clinic in Abilene.
Yeah, super excited. I got to come in and see the place. That's actually how we got to meet, is that you were offering basically a birth story night. And I love the concept, love the idea of women getting together and discussing their birth stories. And we've talked a lot on the podcast about just every time somebody's able to share their story, we get to learn and grow from that experience. And most of the time, it's also healing for the person sharing. And so I just think that's a wonderful, needed resource for women. And I know you provide so much more than that, but I would love to know kind of what happened, how you got into this work. Did you always start out thinking you would do this type of work, or did you have life experiences that caused you to head that direction?
Yeah, so absolutely not. I did not think that I would be pursuing work with like the postpartum population or pregnant population at all. Like I said, my background is in school psychology, and that's very, very much like with little kids and grade school, and that was kind of my jam until I was a kind of a birth nerd, I guess you could say, leading up to the birth of my first. Maybe you can identify with being a
I
birth
can.
nerd. um, I read all the things, I watched all the documentaries, and was just very, what I thought was informed about potential issues that could arise, pain management, all the things before my pregnancy and birth. And so I guess, yeah, I really did not see myself going into this profession therapy wise, until well after my traumatic birth with my first. I wasn't in a place to help anyone, even myself, for a long time. But,
So let's kind of
with,
go back to that, if you don't mind.
sure,
Let's
yeah.
let's kind of go backwards and kind of get back to this point. But how did things start out for you? So your first birth, how did that go?
Um, I guess even going back to the pregnancy, I was just incredibly anxious in the whole pregnancy. It took us a while to conceive, and I say a while, probably like 9 months. But when you want to be pregnant and you're not, that's a
Mm-hmm.
long time. And so I was just so anxious about something happening to the baby. Am I doing everything right? Um, I think a lot of that is some pretty normal first time mom feelings, but it was pretty extreme, um, to the point where, yeah, I think I needed somebody to talk to, and I didn't.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so leading up to I had decided to see a midwife and have a home birth, and was there were just not as many options back then as there are now. And so it was pretty much this one midwife or a hospital, and that was basically my choices. And I I didn't click with this midwife like really well, I would say. But I was like, but I'm young and I'm healthy and my baby is healthy and like she's just going to be there to catch the baby. So it doesn't really matter. Like I'm just going to I'm just going to do this. This is about me, it's not about her, so it's fine. But as the pregnancy went on and on and on and on, I found myself at 41 weeks, at 42 weeks,
Mm,
and then
hmm.
at 43 weeks. And I had this looming sense of just dread. Like, why isn't the baby coming? Why? What's wrong with me? I was not dilated at all. I was not effaced at all. I was keeping that baby in.
Mm,
And I know now that my anxiety and my body was just trying to protect myself and my baby because I didn't feel safe with my care provider. And she never once said, like, I think you need to go to the hospital. I think you need to transfer care. I was so, I was naive and um, trusted that she would tell me what to do. And so when my anxiety just would not take it anymore, I was almost 44 weeks pregnant
whew.
and took myself to the hospital, just me and my husband and my doula, and presented there and was not treated well, as you can maybe imagine. Um, that this person that they've never met before. Oh, I should mention that I called around the week prior and said, hey, if I just show up at your hospital, this is who I am. Like, what would y'all do? Oh, you'd automatically go into a C-section. Like that's like we're
They
not
wouldn't
even going to
even
try to induce you.
induce you? Yeah.
No, that's the
Huh.
the messaging I got from calling multiple hospitals, both near and far.
What was
And
your
so
midwife saying at this time?
she was trying to convince me that I wasn't really as far along as I was. But I mean, I knew exactly when I conceived
Mm,
and really making me kind of question my gut. And that's
yeah.
not what I needed at that point. Like I I needed somebody to tell me what was safe and what to do.
Hmm.
And that wasn't happening. So yeah, and then I'm terrified because I'm calling hospitals and they're telling me that they're going to give me a C-section, basically the minute they see me, and that is like totally not what I wanted for this birth. It's not what I wanted for myself or for my baby. And so that just added to the fear, of seeking a second opinion. um so we showed up to the hospital and were were treated pretty poorly by the OB there. It
Mm,
was a Saturday. And of course, he didn't want to be there on a Saturday. Um, it took a lot of convincing and a lot of tests to even uh, let me get an induction.
mm.
Um, but all the while telling me like it's not going to work and like you're not favorable and like calling me a problem that he has to fix. Um, just a
Wow.
lot of, yeah, it's the way we talk to moms is so important, right? Like
Hmm.
the way we talk to them, about them.
And it's such a
it,
vulnerable state
yes.
for somebody to be using that type of language, especially. I mean, already that's language where you're already needing an advocate. You're needing somebody to step up for you, or you're needing to step up and defend yourself. But you really can't do that when you're in that laboring state, or really just thinking about protecting your baby. And that's
Mhm.
very difficult.
Yeah, and there were a lot of things that I think he could have done to make this experience so much less traumatic. um, but that's where a lot of the trauma stems from, is just how I
Mm.
was treated, or not treated in by the people who I should have been able to trust the most. um, so anyway,
Well, there's that
they
expectation. You can trust a professional when you
yeah,
come in and that you're going
yeah,
to receive good, compassionate care. And when you don't
right.
receive that, it's pretty shocking.
Right, exactly. And I did have some really great nurses, and I also had some really not great nurses while I was
Hmm.
there. But I did have some nurses that were encouraging, but it still wasn't enough to kind of get over um, the overall feel of why I was there and the attitude about me being there.
Nobody wants
So
to feel
they
like a burden when they're
right,
coming in needing to
yes,
have a baby.
yes, exactly. And and this is my first baby. I don't
Yeah.
know what I'm doing. And so yeah, I they did eventually agree to start an induction, and they did Cervidil overnight from a Saturday to a Sunday. Um, it did nothing. It maybe effaced me a little bit if I remember. This was 8.5 years ago, so some of the details get lost with time. But
Hmm.
um, really tried to make it what I wanted for my home birth. I had a couple friends there. This was, of course, all pre-COVID, and so I could have whoever I wanted. I had a couple friends there, and they were there like that Saturday night, and then they were there again Sunday morning. They started Pitocin. Um, I labored and walked around. I bounced on the ball. I was checked. I was, did all the things. And by 5 p.m. that day, I was 1 centimeter dilated after having contractions all day.
Mm.
But they never got very strong, and they kept upping the Pitocin and upping it. And it was just never like, I think my body was just in such a fight or flight that like
Hmm.
those hormones were way more powerful than any kind of synthetic oxytocin that could be, pumped into me.
Well, there's no way you felt
Um,
safe in that environment.
I did not, not
Yeah.
at all. Um, so yeah, we, I say we decided on a C-section, but I mean, really at that point, that was our only option. And I knew that. But it didn't make it any easier to be at that point when this whole time I wanted something so different for myself and
Hmm.
my baby. And
Can I ask a
had,
question?
yes,
And
please.
we've talked a lot about this on the podcast. But a lot of times other things come out in birth, especially those first time births where you're afraid
Mm-hmm.
and there's a
Right.
lot in unknown. Did you have any previous trauma or issues that you felt might have been hindering?
I've done a lot of thinking, and I don't have like an extensive trauma history. Like,
Mm,
I don't have previous sexual trauma or abuse. And so in that way, I feel lucky
good,
because that's
yeah.
not the story for a lot of women. However, you know, birth is vulnerable.
Hmm.
Pregnancy is vulnerable. I think I tend to more so used to than now, but uh, just be very anxious
Hmm.
and not have the coping skills to see it for what it was and name it and deal with it. Um, so I mean, I think that has a lot to do with it.
Yeah, and the unknown can be so
Right.
scary and cause, everyone to be anxious and whenever you don't have people around you who are supporting you in a way that is bringing confidence and
Mm-hmm.
safety to you, then it makes perfect sense that you would you would not be dealing great in that situation.
Yeah. So we went ahead and got prepped for the C-section. And that whole experience was so dehumanizing
Mm,
and detached. Um, I know people just go about their jobs, and that's just an everyday, multiple times a day occurrence to them. But, my baby was only born once,
mm.
and I I can't do that again. I can't do it over. Um, so I wish it would have been handled with more with the reverence that it deserved.
Well, and the recognition that moms don't forget those birth experiences
Yeah.
and how you were made to feel and the whole experience and everything that happened and what somebody said or didn't say. All of that is etched into your brain and it's all heightened at that
Mm-hmm.
moment. And
Yep.
you might, some details may fade a little bit, but you won't forget it.
Mm-mm. Nope. Nope. And I was awake during the C-section. I had a spinal. I hadn't gotten an epidural all day because the contractions really weren't painful. So I did get a spinal. I was awake, but during the C-section, I mean, I really had no preparation for what to expect in a C-section. But the spinal works up really to like your arms, like to like on the top of your chest. And I could not feel myself breathing.
Mm.
And that terrified me. I I was probably screaming,
Hmm.
but if not screaming, internally screaming that like I can't breathe, like I can't feel myself breathing. Like um I had asked that they don't strap down my arms and they agreed. And the anesthesiologist assistant who is kind of up by your head while all this is happening. He was, I'm gonna cry. He was my angel because he just took my hand and laid it on my chest and said, "Look, feel yourself. You're breathing. You can feel your chest going up and down. Like you're okay." And he was also pretty much the only one in the OR that would update me about what was happening. I had said, I really want to know like what y'all are doing as you do it. Um, Please, somebody tell me what the baby looks like. And really, nobody was responsive to me except for him. And he would just tell me, what they were doing with the baby or what the doctor was doing at that moment with me. Um, and I just appreciate his care and his gentleness so much, even to this day. So yeah, that was kind of a bright spot in this horrible experience that that was happening at the same time. But
That's so
my
great that
son
he
came
heard
out.
you.
Yeah, yeah, he was great. My son came out and he seemed to be okay. He was definitely extremely overdue. His Yeah, I mean, I don't know what else to say about that except that it was really apparent that he needed to come out.
Hmm.
um my Initially they had him over in the incubator and or under the lights, and then I got to see him up by my head for a few seconds maybe. And I was really probably completely naive to think that he would just get to be on my chest, and but I was totally unprepared that they would take him to the NICU.
Mm.
I really did not think that that would happen. That did not enter my brain the whole day. um, and so he came with me to the recovery for a little bit, maybe I say a little bit, seconds. Um, and the nurse said, "Okay, mom, kiss your baby. He's going." And then they just took him away.
Ugh.
And I of course sent my husband to be with the baby. Um, and I proceeded for the next 2 hours to have the highest blood pressure I've ever had in my whole life.
Mm.
Um, Full on panic attack, all while trying to pump for my baby. Um, Nurses coming in and just lifting up my bed sheet, talking about my bleeding to each other, but not to me, um, in ways that alarmed me. Like, am I okay? Like, is it too much bleeding? And like, just not the way that you would want to be treated in that situation. Yeah. So from here, the isolation from my baby and was a huge trauma. So he was born on a Sunday night. And I did not get to hold him until probably about 14 hours later. I didn't get to breastfeed him for 2 days. Um, I was pretty much walking back and forth to the NICU around the clock to see him. And when they would finally let me try to feed him, um, but it was rough, and they were telling me that he probably had a seizure. Um, they didn't know, they didn't tell me why they thought that. I guess
Hmm.
because he was like smacking his lips or something. And I'm probably like, well, he wanted to nurse. um, but they ordered all these tests and just made me even more anxious because, and I know now that they were just trying to CYA and do all the tests and things before they let us go, but it was so traumatizing to hear, like, okay, well, now we're going to go do a CT scan, and now we're going to go do this other blood work, and now we're going to go do this. And my baby was just poked and prodded in this bassinet for days. He was there for 5 days, and then we got to room in one night, and then we got to come home. um but that separation was really hard. And I think there's a range of experiences when we have a baby, right? Like some people are just immediately bonded to the baby, um, just mama bear from the get go. Some people, it takes a while to warm up to this new person who you've never met before. And, that protectiveness and that love grows over time. And for me, I think I was so thrust into this situation where I was his only voice that I was beyond mama bear
Mm.
from the very beginning. Um, like I just loved him fiercely. So after I finally, they got my blood pressure under control uh, in the healing, the what's it called, triage. Yes, after surgery. I begged them to take me to the NICU so I could see him. And the nurse that was steering my bed hit three walls on the way to the NICU. And I know she didn't mean to, but like I just had major surgery and I hurt so
Mm.
bad. And it was just like more insult to injury, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and this nurse had already been pretty flippant about the whole C-section, like, oh, Dr. So and so does these all the time, and like, you're not even gonna have a scar. And I was like, I don't care about scar. Like, this
Mm-hmm.
whole experience is not what I wanted. Um, so anyway, I did get to see him that night. I'm of course laying in a bed an hour, I don't know, 3 hours after a C-section. I got to touch his little hand. We hadn't slept in 2 days, and I went to my room and cried alone all night while,
Mm.
I couldn't sleep. I just wanted my baby. Nobody would tell me what they thought was wrong. Nobody would tell me how he was doing. I didn't get any updates. I I didn't even know what to ask for, but
Was your
what
husband
I got
staying in the NICU then?
some of the time, but he also hadn't slept for two or
Oh
three
yeah,
days. And so
yeah.
he was able to sleep some, but I was just up crying and
Mm.
trying to sleep, but just really reliving the entire trauma over and over again in my mind that whole night. Um, Probably trying to process it in some way, but it was lonely and hard, and not something that I would wish on anybody. That
Mm-hmm.
separation from their baby in those first moments, in those first days, is just gut wrenching. Um, but he did well. His blood sugar was off, but I hadn't eaten in 2 days, so that's not a huge
Hmm.
surprise. Um, so they got that regulated. He, once I was allowed to nurse him, he nursed great, and I nursed him longer than any of my other kids, and we nursed for almost 2 years. And
Yay.
I know, really, I loved that bonding experience with him, and the way um, that it bonded us in ways that we couldn't there in the very beginning.
Hmm.
So yeah, that is my birth trauma, and I'm sure there's more
Huh.
than I that time is forgetting. But
Well, so he did 5 days in the NICU, and then you guys were
he
able to
did.
go home. And
Yeah.
how did you do a lot of times with an experience like that? I'm thankful you were able to breastfeed so well. How did you do with postpartum depression?
Um Looking back, I know that I had some what I'll probably call PTSD from the whole
Hmm.
situation.
For sure.
Um but even being a I mean, at this point, I had my master's degree in psychology, right? So I know a lot in my head about what might be happening, but even to that point in all of my studies, I had really only ever heard of postpartum depression, not
Hmm.
postpartum PTSD, not birth trauma, not postpartum anxiety, anything
Hmm.
like that.
Or
And
any type of
so
mood disorders with it.
any type of mood disorder
Mm.
that would be associated with having a baby, which is a huge life event. So
Yep.
no surprise that mood disorders happen around that time frame, right? um and so no, I did not seek help from a therapist until a year postpartum, and at
Mm.
that point I was having intense flashbacks, a lot of trouble separating from him. If he was ever um I mean, yeah, just extreme anxiety around him being okay, around his health, around him being without me,
Hmm.
and intense flashbacks to the birth and what was said around the birth.
That's
Even
rough.
even little comments just stuck in my brain for so long afterward. And so yeah, I didn't seek help until a year after. And looking back, I told, would certainly tell previous me, girl, go to therapy now.
Hmm.
Go now. And it just never seemed like it was quote unquote bad enough to go. And I would say, but my baby's here. My baby's fine. It's not like my baby died. It's not like I'm okay. My baby's okay. What do I have to complain about? And you get that messaging too. Don't get me wrong. I
Yep.
got that messaging, which does not help the situation at all, to hear that your trauma isn't valid, your experience isn't bad enough to warrant you feeling the way that you feel. But like we've talked about, birth is so freaking vulnerable.
Yep.
Pregnancy is so vulnerable. And the words we say to moms in that vulnerable state matter
So
more than we
much.
even know. More than we
Yeah.
know.
And in the
You have the
postpartum,
power.
ugh,
Yeah. Yeah.
it
Oh, yeah. Postpartum too.
it's
And you
so
have the power
heightened.
with your words to build a mother up or to tear her down completely. And I think that's kind of the message I want to make sure your listeners hear, is that we each have the power to, in our words and in our actions, build up new moms or tear them down. And yeah, it's so important.
I often
Um,
say scripturally that's, the power of life and death is in the tongue.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I mean, it really is. It's so powerful. And that's why we are to be careful with our words. What we
Mm-hmm.
say, I mean, even just to a mama in the grocery store that you may not have any relationship with her
Yep.
whatsoever, what you
Yep.
say to her will stick with her. It will matter.
Mm-hmm.
And so whether you
Yep.
talk about, oh, what a beautiful, belly she has and excited for her new baby, or you proceed to tell her your horror story,
Right.
those two things will make a big difference in her life.
Yep. It absolutely will. And even how much more so for the people that we are supposed to be able to trust in
Mm-hmm.
that very vulnerable time. Um, the yeah, it took me a lot of time to forgive that OB and to forgive my midwife for
Yeah.
the injustices that were done and the wrongs that were committed, and to forgive myself for not knowing what I know now. And that's been a process that has taken many years, but then has also, led me to where I am now in my path that I've taken since then. And so
Did
it's not,
in your
yeah, it
other
doesn't.
births, did it come up?
Go ahead.
In your other births,
Um,
how did you do with them?
yeah, so I don't even know where to start with my other verse. I knew for my next pregnancy, and we waited a while. So most of my kids, my three youngest, have a pretty short age gap, but the age gap between my oldest and my second is almost 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
So when he was around 2, we started trying again. And actually my first pregnancy after starting to try was a miscarriage.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not something that I had really even considered would be a possibility for myself. And so I was very caught off guard, very let down by my body again. That was a big theme, I think, in my first birth, was being very let down by my body. And at one point, my OB had even, I kind of asked him afterwards, like, what happened? Like, why didn't the induction work? Why didn't I ever go into labor? And he said that some women like you just have a lazy uterus. That's what he called it, a lazy uterus.
Wow.
And that stuck with me.
Mm-hmm.
And I would not describe myself as lazy at all. And so that felt like a slap in the face to the work I was trying to do to get this baby here.
Oh man.
And I carried that with me for a long time. Like, does that mean my uterus is broken? Does that mean like my uterus just doesn't know how to go into labor? Does that mean that is this going to happen again? There were so many unanswered questions. And that really kept me from trying again. And then to have this early miscarriage after being so excited that we were, going to have another baby,
Mm-hmm.
was really devastating, because I did feel let down again, that my body had let me down again. I did have a lot of, I wouldn't quite call it pain, but just odd sensations and feelings around my scar in the years after, I would say really until my second baby was born, and kind of some of those adhesions probably, got stretched out some.
Mm-hmm.
But it was just a constant reminder that I had been through this thing and that my body had failed me, is how I felt. So to live in that kind of discomfort day to day was not awesome, and was a reminder of the trauma. And I think another point I want to bring up is that when women have birth trauma, it's it's a complicated emotion, right? Because on one hand, for those that come out of it with a baby, it's their baby's birthday, and you have to celebrate this birthday, you feel like, the next year and the year after and the year after.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also the day that your trauma happened. And so there's a lot of big feelings around that and a lot of conflicting feelings around that. And I definitely felt that for the first several years after. And, I still get pretty tender around that time, but it's not in the same way that it once was. But I think it's important to honor our own experience in that time. And to if you feel inclined to have a party for your 1 year old, it's okay to do it on a different day than their actual birthday. It's okay to have that day be a sweet family time, or just a comfort time for yourself, instead of living up to some sort of unspoken expectation about
Mm-hmm.
birthday celebrations. But that's a complicated feeling, right? To have this really joyous occasion, what should be joyous, also coincide with trauma is it's conflicting.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I like the idea of just taking some time for yourself and putting it on another day.
Yeah, and
If you feel like you have to do it.
right, yeah, we actually had my oldest son, his first birthday on the day that we came home from the hospital.
Mm,
So instead of having it on his, and it just kind of happened that fell on a Saturday or Sunday or whenever we could do it, but that seemed appropriate, and that seemed right, and that seemed healthy and like a good boundary
for sure.
for for me.
Hello, Healing Trauma Mamas listeners. I wanted to pause the podcast just for a moment to let you know about the platform that I've been using to create this podcast, Anchor by Spotify. Anchor has been so easy for me to use. As you all know, I've said many times that I'm a very unlikely podcast host. In fact, I never thought I'd be on a podcast, let alone hosting one myself. But when my daughter showed me Anchor last spring, I realized how easy it was for me to be able to create content and upload it to many different platforms using Anchor. I'm so thankful I got started, and I'm extremely thankful it's completely free. So I think that every single person has something valuable to share with the world. You listening right now have something valuable to share. And all you have to do is download the Anchor app and start your own podcast today. Let me know when you do, and I look forward to listening to it. Okay, back to the podcast.
But to go back to my other births, I knew going into my second birth that I did not want another C-section.
Mm-hmm.
I called around to try to find, and this is almost 6 years ago now, so a lot of things have changed for the better in this area. It's still hard to find a provider sometimes, but we do have more options now than we did back then.
Mm-hmm.
In the hospital, and that was where I felt safest with my going into my second birth. I didn't trust my body enough to try to have a home birth again.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly not. I was like, well, I'm never going to go into labor, so I definitely need to have somebody who will see me in the hospital and to induce me. Like, I was pretty certain that I would need to be induced. And so before we even tried to conceive, I interviewed a lot of providers, and not just in Abilene, which most of them said absolutely not anyway. The ones that did say, oh, we'll see, you can try, but you need to go into labor on your own by 39 weeks. And I was like, yeah, that's probably not going to happen for me. Like,
Mm-hmm.
just given my history. So went to DFW, and I think I just want to say that I am privileged to be able to do that, and not all women are going to be able to have that kind of access to the care that they want. And that's a shame because, and it is changing. We do have more providers now that will do VBAC,
Mm-hmm.
but a woman's choice to a VBAC shouldn't be dependent on where she lives
Yeah.
and or the means that she has to get to a provider who will facilitate what she wants.
Yeah, I've talked to some that have had to travel who wanted a hospital VBAC, and they've
Yeah.
had to travel so far to find anybody that will give them the opportunity at all.
Yep. I drove to Denton from Abilene,
Yep.
so 3.5 hours. And we were fortunate enough that at that point, my in laws lived in Fort Worth, which is still an hour and a half from Denton with traffic. But, it was in the summer, and my husband and I both work for the schools. And so we just kind of camped out there the last few weeks. And I, you know, the most important thing to me in that pregnancy and that birth was finding a provider that I could trust 100%, had no qualms about, had no uh, had no concerns that this, even if it did end in another C-section, that he would try everything he
Mm.
could to make it not traumatic and to make it what I wanted. And that was everything. That's all I wanted. My standards had gone way down. I didn't have a birth plan. I didn't have a definitely no epidural. I just wanted not to be traumatized, honestly. That's all I
And did you
wanted.
did you find that provider?
I did.
Yay.
Uh, Yes, he was amazing. For those that maybe have heard of the great Dr. Cummings in Denton, he is no longer practicing OB because he's retired. But
Oh, I was gonna give everybody
I
like
know,
resource. Yes, let's go.
yes, I do. I do have
Oh.
other resources. So, fun fact: all my four kids have been. I've had different providers for. Some of them have
Mm-hmm.
had two or three providers for each pregnancy. So,
Oh.
yes, this doctor was at the time, like really the VBAC doctor in the state. And he would do VBAC after 4 and 5 C-sections. And it's all in the hospital,
Oh,
and
that's
he would just be
amazing.
so supportive. And I felt so safe and so heard every time I saw him, and just built that trust over the course of the pregnancy that when I was getting towards the end and getting nervous that like I'm not going to go into labor, he and I came up with a plan together that I said, look, I don't want to go over 41 weeks. Like, I don't think I can mentally handle it. And the nerves I'm already having are getting in the way of my tranquility in these last, in this is probably at
Mm-hmm.
like 40 weeks exactly. We're probably having this conversation. And so he and I came up with a plan together that I think it was like 40 weeks and 6 days. I would go in for an induction and, do Pitocin. And if it didn't work, we would just shut off Pitocin and come back in a few days and try it again, or go into labor on my own.
That's
And
awesome.
just having that plan just took all the anxiety off of me,
Mm-hmm.
because I I knew I was going to be taken care of. I knew my baby would be here in a timely manner. But I also knew that it wasn't going to be some sort of big emergency, and that, if it happened like the first time and the Pitocin didn't work, then we could just shut it off and go home. And I
Mm.
had heard from probably a handful of women that had been in his care at that point, that he'd done that for, and been true to his word that, hey, this isn't working. We're going to shut it off and you're going to go home and rest for a couple days. And so I knew it wasn't just idle talk, but that he really would back up that care. And lo and behold, The Pitocin worked beautifully, and I barely needed any at all. So I went in that morning for the induction and was 0% dilated, 0 centimeters dilated, maybe a little effaced. And so I'm like, oh, great. Same story, second verse. Here we go. This is not going to go anywhere. But, I felt so safe and I felt so heard. And it didn't take maybe 2 hours on the Pitocin, and I was already at 4 centimeters. And the contractions were way stronger than any I had experienced on this super high dose of Pitocin with my first. Like
Hmm.
I'd pretty much maxed out on Pitocin with my first, and they were little nothing of contractions. And at this point, I'm like doing my swaying and rocking and sitting on the toilet and like working through these contractions. And so then I was like, wow, this is happening. Like this is gonna happen. And so I think he saw that I just really needed that boost of like confidence.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was like, okay, like think about it, but like I really think that like we could break your water and this could like, this could go like you could see a lot of progress. I think that's what he wanted me to see. Like you could see a lot of progress. So I thought about it for a little while. I was like, okay, yeah, like let's do this. Like we're in it. This is gonna happen. And so I let him break my water. And then for the next hour, he just sat in the room with me and we listened to, he sat and like took a little like rest in the rocking chair while I was laboring. And we listened to worship music and I cried and cried and
Mm.
just couldn't believe that this was actually happening, that this was working, that my body wasn't broken. And at one point, they even turned the Pitocin off completely because my body had taken over with the contractions. And that was so empowering, like my body is doing this, my body's working.
When you were
And
so supported, how great to
mm-hmm,
have a provider that was supporting you in the way that you asked him to and
yes,
encouraging you and trying his best to, just honor your wishes. I mean, that's amazing.
yeah, it really was. He is like he doesn't even know what an angel he is
Mm.
to so many women, but
Well,
he
the
really
thought that
is.
just occurred to me too is like, we're so excited about that and that's so amazing, but that really should be the standard. That should be what we want,
Mm-hmm,
that everybody should be up to. And it
absolutely.
should be rare that we have somebody who isn't doing that.
Right. Right. That you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Um, and he's also just wonderful.
Yeah, it sounds
I'm,
like it.
so yeah, that birth, yeah. So I did end up getting an epidural because they turned off the Pitocin and my contractions were so strong and I couldn't relax through them because I had done really zero birth prep because I was just like, you know what, I can white knuckle it through this. Like that is not a problem. If I don't have a
Mm.
C-section, I can do anything. Well, I should have done something to
Mm.
prepare. So, but I was pretty open to whatever needed to happen. And so while I was probably about 5 centimeters, I got an epidural. They ended up having to turn the Pitocin on just like a little bit. Like I think maybe I ended up having like 4 of Pitocin until I delivered. So like barely any.
Mhm.
And I think it goes up to like 20 something. Anyway,
I don't know.
I had like 4 milligram. I don't know how they measure it, but it was not very much. And labored for, I mean, I got the epidural probably at 3 and I started pushing at 7 and he was out by 8.
Mm.
Um, he did have meconium when they broke my water. And I should say that my first one, of course, did have meconium too. And so that's why I was crying a lot during after he broke my water. I was just like, it's the same thing and he's going to have problems. And he was just very reassuring, like, no, it's going to be okay. And of course, the NICU team was kind of close by because of the meconium. They checked him out, and then he got to come to me, pretty immediately. And I just cried and so happy.
Oh.
Um, and yeah, that is my second birth. Very redeeming. I will say afterward, I was not prepared. I thought, this birth was awesome. It's everything I wanted. I was not prepared for the level of anxiety and depression I felt after that pregnancy and
Mm.
birth. Um, I thought this went so well. How could I be anything but happy? And I was having these really intense, intrusive thoughts, which I think is something we don't talk about enough.
Yep.
That is super common after having a baby. And with my first, I would have intrusive thoughts, but they were all real thoughts that had happened. They were like reliving flashback thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
But these thoughts with my second were like, were thoughts like, he's not really mine. I would have
Mm.
that thought a lot. He's not really mine. And it was interesting because I didn't bond with him immediately like I did with my first. And you would think that this baby that got put on my chest almost immediately, that, I have didn't get, he did have to spend a little bit of time in the NICU because of his blood sugar, but was not separated for very long at all. You'd think that I'd have more of a easy bond, but it was the opposite. So, so yeah, I guess just to say that you never know what you're going to get after birth, and I'm a pretty big advocate now for people just being prepared of the signs of PMADs, so
For
perinatal
sure.
mood and anxiety disorders, before they go into birth and postpartum, so that they know what to look for. Um,
Yeah, it's not a respecter
eh,
of persons either. You don't have to have a
right?
traumatic birth in order for you
Yeah.
then to have some type
Yes.
of perinatal mood disorder afterwards.
Yeah.
That it's not a
Exactly.
qualification.
Nope. Nope. Not at all. And having a tough birth or tough pregnancy can put you more at risk, but there it doesn't discriminate. It doesn't. And so I finally got up the courage to, try to find some support I was already seeing a therapist, but in the form of, some medication.
Mm-hmm.
And I just I think I had to go to 4 different doctors before anyone would prescribe me something even as benign as Zoloft, because I was breastfeeding.
Mm.
And it felt it felt very much like they didn't care about me, they cared about the baby. And even though I knew that Zoloft is well researched to be plenty safe in breastfeeding. And so I'm a pretty big advocate now that, like, there are doctors and prescribers out there that know the truth and know the ins and outs of prescribing what is safe and what is not during the postpartum period. And part of the advocacy I do now is as a postpartum support international volunteer, and I try to link people to prescribers and therapists that have expertise in this area, so that they're not met with the same kind of resistance that I was. Because, when we deny care to these moms, tragedy can happen,
Mm-hmm.
can and does.
Yep.
And so we as a community need to rally around postpartum moms in a way that we are just woefully not doing right now.
I've seen it blown off so many times too.
Oh yeah.
And when moms try to speak up just a little bit, it's hard for them to speak up anyways. But when they try to speak up just
Mm-hmm.
a little bit and they're really brushed aside, it just makes me so sad, and it's just heartbreaking that we're not taking better care of our postpartum moms.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Exactly. Um, so that I think that experience really propelled me into trying to learn more about PMADs and about the changes that happen in our bodies and in our brains after we have a baby. That that there are real tangible things that you can do to seek wellness in yourself after birth. And it shouldn't require the amount of advocacy that we have to do, but that's where we're at. But it is important to advocate for yourself after that time if you do find yourself feeling not like yourself.
Yeah.
um Very similarly, I know you probably don't want to hear the details of every single birth, but I will talk a little bit about my third, because his was also a hospital birth, but I had found a nurse midwife and OB team in Cleburne, and they, as far as I know, are still practicing, and I highly recommend them. Dr. Glover and Jen Juve in Denton, or not in Denton, in Cleburne. So I again drove, this time just 2 hours, not 3.5 hours. And this time I actually went into labor on my own.
Yay. That's
Yes,
awesome.
the day before my due date, I went into labor on my own. And that was so validating. Like, yes, yes,
Mm-hmm.
my body can do this. It knows what it's doing. And ended up, they have, for anybody who wants an in-hospital birth, I really cannot recommend Cleburne enough. They have birth tubs. So I labored in the birth tub from 6 centimeters till basically I got out. There, he again had meconium, so they had me get out of the tub, and within 8 minutes of getting out the tub, he was born.
Oh,
So,
awesome.
and the OB like, so I was kind of up on the bed on my knees. The OB is on the floor delivering the baby. And if you've been in hospitals, OBs don't normally do that, right? They make the mom accommodate them. No,
Mm-hmm.
he was like gonna just be there and help me deliver the baby however I needed to. And he
Oh,
was amazing.
I love it.
He just happened to be on call the weekend that I went into labor, and it was beautiful. And my water broke on its own. And yeah, that was easy and wonderful. And yet again, afterward, I had pretty significant postpartum anxiety and intrusive thoughts.
Mm.
And this time, the intrusive thoughts were so horrific that, I mean, I don't know if your listeners even want to know the details, but just suffice to say that you can have really disturbing and violent intrusive thoughts. And I'll say this about intrusive thoughts: thoughts are thoughts, and they're not reality.
Yeah.
And I didn't seek help when definitely I should have, for fear that somebody's going to hear me say these thoughts out loud and think that I'm going to hurt my baby,
Haley,
when that couldn't.
do you
Yes,
mind
please.
sharing some of them out loud? Because I feel like it's
Yeah.
so taboo. Like we don't talk about it.
Yeah.
And so they don't even know. I've talked to others, they're like, well, what do you mean
Mm-hmm.
intrusive? Like, what does that really
Mm-hmm.
look like?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, after my second, I would have these thoughts like, he's not really mine. Or I would get this flash of like him being left in the hot car. He was born in July. And so, kind of situations that, like the car, like that could happen, right? And so you're like hyper aware of this new little thing that depends on you for everything. But then after my third, I would have thoughts about, intrusive thoughts are such odd things.
Mm.
Let me see if I can explain this a little bit better. So there is a little talked about peripartum mood disorder called postpartum OCD. And a key feature of OCD in the postpartum period is these intrusive thoughts. They are thoughts that don't come on by your own will, that you are, and the key feature of them is that you are horrified by them or you are disturbed by them. They go against what your brain knows is to be true. And I think a key distinction I want to make is that we hear some of these thoughts out loud, And immediately, people who aren't as informed go to psychosis, which we
Mm-hmm.
know is a real thing and we know is an emergency, right? And certainly at that point, mom and baby need to be treated immediately, and mom doesn't need to have access alone to the baby. And it is a true emergency. But the key distinguishing feature clinically is that moms who have intrusive thoughts know that they would never hurt their baby. They know that they are going to do anything they can to avoid this intrusive thought actually happening. Moms who are teetering on psychosis think that these thoughts could be rational. Like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, yeah, I could see how that would be true. But the mom with extreme anxiety, intrusive thoughts, OCD is the mom that is, and it's so common. Every time I talk about my intrusive thoughts and am open about it, I get another mom that says, "Oh, that happened to me, but I didn't tell anybody because I
Yeah.
knew that they would think I was crazy." Another thing about OCD is that you feel. I hear a lot of moms say, "I think I'm going crazy." Well, the person in psychosis does not think they're going crazy. Most of the time, they think they're rational. Though it's those around them that see that they're different.
Right.
So I just kind of want to give that like explainer before I go into because I think these intrusive thoughts are so common and so not talked about. But in particular, my intrusive thoughts after my third involved like putting him in the oven or the microwave, or him falling onto like a hot like barbecue or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And as I've been doing this work for a number of years now, I see themes in intrusive thoughts. So, fear around water is a big intrusive thought that people have. I've heard from moms that won't bathe the baby in a bathtub, like they'll do sponge baths, that won't take their babies near lakes or any body of water. Another theme that I've heard come up again and again is like the fireplace, oven, microwave heat sources.
Mm-hmm.
And another one is oh, I had it and I lost it. But suffice to say, there are certain themes. Oh, dropping the baby, that comes up a lot. Accidents, right?
Yeah.
Or forgetting the baby. And I was thinking about this the other day and processing kind of what these themes mean with my supervisor, actually. And I was like, it's like kind of this heat theme is kind of like it's like the hearth of your home, and you have this baby who is so near and dear to your heart, and like you want it to be like you want it in this warm place. And she was like, it's kind of like being in a womb again. I was like, whoa, blow my mind. Like
Mm-hmm.
that is you, yeah, like is your mind trying to connect this thought that like you want the baby to be back in this place of protection and of
Mm-hmm.
warmth and not out in this scary world. And that just blew my mind because I think that's true. And studies have actually linked these intrusive thoughts to an excess of oxytocin, which again blows my mind because it would make
Yeah.
sense that if we have an increase of oxytocin, we're like over caregiving, over mothering, over concern,
Mm-hmm.
um, and that our minds would constantly be on guard uh, to try to make sense of that and to try to look for every single possible scenario that could be of harm. So that's what I'll say about that. And if you have experienced any kind of intrusive thought, any kind of uh, harm coming to your baby, or you doing harm to your baby, and you're horrified by that, just know that you're not alone. It is so
Mm-hmm.
common. Something like 80% of parents endorse that they have had intrusive thoughts after the birth, but we never talk about it because we are so afraid
Yeah.
of, and legitimately so, unfortunately, of providers overreacting and not taking the time to get to the bottom of what's happening. Um, so yeah, I don't know if you have any questions about
Yeah, well,
that.
I just, from what you just said, I've thought about that. It's either one, it's always an extreme. It's either an overreaction
Mm-hmm.
or it's a brush it off
Mm-hmm.
and it's nothing. And
Mm-hmm.
I really want to see us doing better. Like mamas deserve
Yeah.
better, that we are really
Mm-hmm.
taking this seriously and understand it more. I know we're learning still, but there's a lot of information
Mm-hmm.
out there. And if you take the time to learn, and these practitioners
Yes.
should take the time to learn instead of just going off of a
Mm-hmm.
checklist that they're supposed to give
Yeah.
moms at their 6 week
Right.
appointment.
Right. Well, I'll say something about those checklists. Those do not at all encompass the breadth of experience of a
Mm-hmm.
postpartum mom. You
Yeah.
know, it's woefully inadequate. It's horribly inaccurate at seeing, and it's done at what, maybe after the birth in 6 weeks. Like,
Yes.
a lot of moms don't have issues come up until well after that.
And
I think,
they know easily reading it. Oh, I better answer
oh,
these correctly. I
yeah.
mean, come on.
Oh, yeah. Right. Exactly. Exactly. And I find too, a lot of times moms with intrusive thoughts will kind of test the waters and say, like, well, I'm having worries about like the baby, like dropping the baby when I'm walking down the stairs. And the provider will go, oh, it's fine. Like, no, you're going to be, no, that's just a worry. It's okay. When really you should be asking, like, okay, then what do you do?
Yeah,
If you ask these
probing.
follow-up questions, these moms are completely avoiding going upstairs for weeks at a time,
Mm.
or they are scooting down the steps on their butt every time they go down the stairs, like extreme behaviors to make their anxiety less around whatever intrusive thought they're having. For myself, I wouldn't go near the kitchen because I did not want to think about my child in the oven, and so I would avoid the kitchen at all costs.
Mm.
And it interferes with your life. But I certainly wasn't going to tell that to anybody. Um, and when I finally did reach out for help, it was, I did not tell them the whole story. I knew at that point what was going on, and I knew that it probably wouldn't be in my interest to tell the whole story to a prescriber,
Mm-hmm.
which is unfortunate, right? Like, we should be
Yep.
able to trust these providers and prescribers with what's really going on. But at this point, I had been in the postpartum, world and learning about this for quite a while, and could see for myself and in myself what was happening. And just that alone, knowing what's going on with yourself, is so huge. And having a name for what you're experiencing and
Oh,
knowing
yeah.
that you're not alone. And I am happy to say that I did find a prescriber after that pregnancy that, gave me a serious and substantial dose a of a medication that helped. And within 2 or 3 weeks of being on that medication, the intrusive thoughts all but went away.
Oh,
Um,
awesome.
and really, that is, for a mom going through that, that is everything. And I made the decision for my fourth to stay on that medication, on it was is Zoloft, through that pregnancy and postpartum. And with the yeah, with just the support of finally somebody who would be willing to monitor that and understand that that was the best choice for me and my baby, and support that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to be different for everyone. But for myself, that was the wisest choice that I could make. Um, and I guess the only thing that I'll say about my fourth baby, born almost 2 years ago now, is
Hmm.
that I actually, it kind of came full circle and I had him at home.
Look at
And
you.
that was, what'd you say?
I said, look at you. You finally got your home birth.
yeah, and it was nothing like what I thought it would be, but everything that I needed it to be.
Mm,
So something that I didn't mention before is that I had a wonderful, loving, supportive doula through my first three births. And yes, she drove from Abilene to my births to be there with me. When I traveled for my second and third births. And then she was my midwife for my fourth. By then, she had her midwifery license. And so she was my midwife for my fourth child. And that relationship has meant so much to me.
mm,
And so the one thing I will say about my fourth birth is that the labor did not go at all like I thought it would go. Like I really had zero pain in labor with my third, and it was all natural. Never got an epidural. Labored in the water. Did hypno babies, and was just like chill. Um, I experienced a lot of not being able to like kind of get in my groove. A lot of every time I'd get in the water, the contractions would just space out, which was so frustrating. I'd have to be like upright to put pressure and like dilate, but I really like that felt horrible and just like it was painful. He ended up being a whole pound bigger than my others. My others were all right around 8 pounds, and my fourth was 9 pounds 6 ounces. And so maybe that had something to do with it.
maybe.
But when he was born, he had shoulder dystocia, which for those that aren't maybe aware, like it is an urgent situation. And I knew what was happening in the moment. Of course, my midwife knew what was happening in the moment. In any other scenario where I didn't trust my provider completely, I would have been freaking out. But because I trusted her so much and because
Mm,
I knew that she knew what to do, I was not traumatized by that. Was it a little scary? Yeah, it was a little scary. He took 2 or 3 minutes to get out of that, but I I was not traumatized. And
awesome.
then hearing from people afterward, like, oh, if you were in the hospital, we would have held him in and gone and done a C-section. Well, oh my word, like talk about trauma. Like this was no, this was not that at all. And he he's okay.
Oh,
And my midwife knew what to do and what to tell me to do to get him here safely. And so I think the biggest takeaway that I've had, one of the big takeaways from my births, is that trust in your care provider is so important. Um, and that relationship is so important to your well being. And an emergency can arise, but if you trust those around you, it it can be the difference between it being a trauma or it being a just something that happened.
yeah, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So now what are you doing?
Well, now I have a psychology clinic here in Abilene. I see pregnant, postpartum, and loss moms and parents for therapy. And I also am continuing with my background in school psychology, and I see children for psychological assessment, mainly autism and ADHD and learning issues. I do some social skills groups with kids, and yeah, so I love that I can integrate my work with moms into my work with kids and really uh it's all connected, right? It's all family. What we do for moms matters in how they engage their kids, in how they parent, in their own children's attachment. And I love being able to integrate that whole experience with the whole family into my practice now.
That's awesome. What a great resource for us in the area.
Thank you. Yeah, my clinic is called Grounded Roots Family Development Center. I'm on Facebook and on Instagram. I hold a weekly postpartum support group. That is just a peer support group. So it's not a therapeutic group, but it's just a chance for moms to get together and chat about whatever we need to talk about. So that group is Abilene Postpartum Support Community on Facebook. And I tend to post the updates about groups and whatnot through that Facebook group.
Great. And we'll make sure in the show notes, we'll have links to every way
Oh,
that
awesome.
people can contact you and check you out. Are you on Instagram as well?
I am.
Yeah, we'll
Yes.
we'll put a link to all of that, and so others can contact you, because like we've said many times before, it is such a needed field in our area. We have so many postpartum moms who are just going by the
Mm-hmm.
wayside and struggling so much. And if you can make a
Yeah.
difference in just one of their lives, then that will be amazing. I'll just be so thankful. But
Yeah.
I know that you're going to be speaking into so many mamas' lives and helping them and the whole family. And I just think that's just such an amazing opportunity that you have grasped there, and that you're putting your personal experience and all your skills as a provider to use for the community. And I just want to thank you for that.
Oh, thank you so much. And one other resource I'd want to mention is postpartum.net. And that is the Postpartum Support International
Hmm.
website. They have daily online support groups. They have peer support. I can't remember exactly what it's called, but they will match you with a peer support person to find you resources to walk alongside you in your postpartum journey. This is a great resource, maybe for moms who are really rural or for whatever reason don't feel like therapy is a good fit. These
Hmm.
postpartum groups meet virtually. Literally, there's a group going every single day of the week.
Mm.
And they have just a ton of information about providers, about prescribers. Anybody who has specialized training in postpartum will be on that website, and you can find them there. So that is just an awesome resource.
Yeah, absolutely. I've referred people to there many times before.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it's a great, immediate resource that you can get to. And then now we have a local resource as well in you. And I think that's just wonderful that we're gaining more resources, and
Yes.
able to help more and more moms, and that's just a step in the right direction. So I'm real
Yeah.
thankful for
And
that.
and that's exactly where what this is. Like we are making steps in the right direction, but we still have a long way to go.
We do. We do. But we'll continue making those steps and continue bringing
Okay.
awareness and continue having the conversations that may be a little difficult. Um,
Absolutely.
but just continue to be open and honest with each other, and remember that our words matter. Thank you for listening. May you be encouraged and strengthened by what you've heard today. Remember, you are dearly loved by your Creator, so be who He created you to be. May you go in peace, friends. Till next time, Shalom.